Thomas Mercer had learned to recognize the difference between someone who was merely injured and someone who was running from something that had tried very hard to kill them. The young woman he found collapsed beside the mountain trail on Kepler's edge displayed all the signs of the latter: defensive wounds on her forearms, the kind of exhaustion that came from days of desperate travel, and the hypervigilant awareness that never quite allowed unconsciousness even when the body desperately needed rest. She was Valdorian, that much was obvious from her elongated limbs and the silver-blue skin that marked her species, but her bioluminescent patterns were so dim from injury and fatigue that he couldn't determine her age or emotional state through the usual visual cues that Valdorian biology provided. Her clothing had once been well made but was now torn and blood-stained, and she clutched a small pack that seemed to contain nothing but basic survival supplies. "Easy," Thomas said softly, approaching with his hands visible and his movements deliberately slow as her amber eyes tracked his approach with the focused intensity of someone who'd learned that strangers could represent either salvation or additional danger. "My name is Thomas. I'm a medic. You're injured, and I'd like to help." The woman's response was a slight nod that could have indicated either permission or simple acknowledgement of his presence. Her bioluminescent patterns flickered weakly, colors that Thomas's limited knowledge of Valdorian physiology suggested indicated severe pain mixed with cautious hope. "Can you tell me your name?" Thomas asked, kneeling beside her while activating his medical scanner to assess the extent of her injuries. "Lyra," she said quietly, her voice carrying the musical undertones characteristic of Valdorian speech but strained with fatigue and discomfort. "Well, Lyra, you've got some serious injuries that need immediate attention," Thomas said, reviewing his scanner readings that showed dehydration, multiple contusions, and what appeared to be partially healed plasma burns across her back and shoulders. "The good news is that none of them are immediately life-threatening. The challenging news is that you're going to need more comprehensive medical care than I can provide in the field." "No hospitals," Lyra said immediately, her bioluminescent patterns flaring to the deep reds that even Thomas recognized as indicating fear and rejection. "No authorities. No official records." Thomas paused in his medical assessment, recognizing the tone of someone whose safety depended on remaining invisible to whatever systems might be searching for them. His military experience had taught him that sometimes the best medical care involved respecting a patient's need for anonymity. "All right," he said calmly. "No hospitals, no authorities, no records. But Lyra, some of these injuries are going to require ongoing treatment. Are you willing to accept help from someone who won't ask questions you don't want to answer?" Her amber eyes studied his face with the careful evaluation of someone whose survival had depended on accurately assessing strangers' motivations. "Why would you help someone you don't know?" "Because you're injured and I have medical training," Thomas said simply. Sometimes it really is that straightforward. Over the next several hours, Thomas worked to stabilize Lyra's condition using the field medical supplies he carried during his travels across Kepler's edge. The plasma burns required specialized treatment that drew on his military medic training, the dehydration necessitated careful monitoring of electrolyte balance, and the psychological trauma demanded patience and gentle reassurance that healing was possible. "These plasma burns," Thomas said as he applied synthetic skin grafts to the worst of the damaged areas, "they're for military-grade weapons." "Lyra, were you caught in some kind of armed conflict?" "I don't remember," she said quietly, though her bioluminescent pattern suggested that her memory loss was selective rather than comprehensive. "There was an attack. Explosions. People running. After that, nothing clear until I woke up in the forest." Thomas nodded, recognizing trauma responses that included gaps in memory around violent events. Sometimes the mind protects us from remembering experiences that are too overwhelming to process immediately. The memories may return gradually as you heal. And if they don't, then we focus on moving forward rather than understanding the past, Thomas said, completing the medical treatment and beginning to pack his supplies. "Lyra, where were you traveling when you were injured?" "I was trying to reach the capital," she said, her voice carrying uncertainty about whether sharing even that limited information was safe. "I have people there who might help me." "The capital is about 3 days' walk if we follow the main trails," Thomas said, calculating travel time based on her current physical condition. But in your condition, it's going to take longer. Are you comfortable traveling with me, or would you prefer directions and supplies to make the journey alone? Lyra was quiet for several minutes, her bioluminescent patterns cycling through colors that suggested complex internal debate about trust, safety, and available options. You would travel with me even though you don't know who I am or what kind of trouble might be following me, she asked. I would travel with you because you're injured, you need ongoing medical care, and the journey to the capital involves terrain that's dangerous for someone traveling alone, Thomas replied. As for what kind of trouble might be following you, well, I've dealt with various kinds of trouble before. You're not concerned that helping me might put you in danger. I'm concerned that not helping you would definitely put you in danger, Thomas said, recognizing that Lyra's questions reflected genuine worry about involving him in whatever circumstances had led to her injuries. Lyra, I'm not going to abandon someone who needs medical care just because that care might involve inconvenience or risk. Her bioluminescent patterns shifted to the warm golds that Thomas had learned indicated gratitude and trust, though she maintained the careful vigilance that suggested her trust was provisional rather than complete. Very well, she said finally. I accept your offer of travel companionship and medical care. But Thomas, if we encounter situations where helping me becomes too dangerous, I want you to promise that you'll prioritize your own safety. I promise to make responsible decisions about risk management, Thomas said diplomatically, though privately he suspected that his definition of responsible might differ significantly from hers when it came to abandoning someone under his medical care. They began traveling the next morning, with Thomas adjusting their pace to accommodate Lyra's injuries while maintaining the kind of alert observation that his military training had made automatic. The trail toward the capital wound through mountain terrain that was beautiful but potentially hazardous, with weather patterns that could change rapidly and wildlife that required careful navigation. Thomas, Lyra said during one of their rest stops, may I ask what brought you to this remote area of Kepler's Edge? I provide medical care to frontier settlements that don't have permanent healthcare facilities, Thomas explained, sharing rations while monitoring her recovery progress. It's work that combines medical practice with travel, which suits someone who prefers independence to institutional employment. You were military trained. Field medic, several different conflicts, Thomas confirmed. The training translates well to civilian medical practice, and the experience with handling difficult situations under pressure proves useful for frontier medicine. And you chose to work alone rather than with established medical organizations? Thomas paused in his meal preparation, recognizing that Lyra's questions reflected genuine interest in his background rather than simple conversation. I chose to work in ways that allow me to help people without navigating bureaucratic barriers or political complications that might prevent providing care to those who need it most. Lyra's bioluminescent patterns shifted to colors that suggested understanding and approval. You prefer to help people based on need rather than official authorization. Exactly. Some of the most important medical care happens outside official systems, for people who can't access traditional healthcare for various reasons. Various reasons like avoiding official records and government attention. Among other things, Thomas agreed, understanding that Lyra was testing whether his approach to medicine would accommodate her obvious need for anonymity. As they continued their journey over the following days, Thomas observed details about his traveling companion that suggested she was more than a simple refugee from frontier conflicts. Her speech patterns indicated advanced education, her knowledge of multiple languages exceeded what most settlers possessed, and her reactions to certain topics suggested familiarity with political and military concepts that refugees wouldn't typically encounter. But her trauma responses were genuine, her gratitude for basic kindness was heartfelt, and her need for medical care was unquestionable. Thomas focused on providing the care she needed while respecting her obvious desire for privacy about her identity and circumstances. What he didn't know, as they made their way toward the capital city where Lyra hoped to find safety, was that their destination was currently the center of a galaxy-wide search for Princess Liara Thane, heir to the Valdorian Empire, who had disappeared 3 weeks earlier during a diplomatic mission and whose safe return had become a matter of interstellar political urgency. And what Lyra, Princess Liara, didn't know was that her decision to trust a human stranger with her life was about to become the foundation for the kind of authentic relationship that royal protocol had never allowed her to experience, changing both their lives in ways that neither could have anticipated when Thomas first found her collapsed beside a mountain trail. The second day of their journey revealed more about Lyra's background than she probably intended to share, as her responses to various situations demonstrated knowledge and instincts that went far beyond typical frontier experience. When they encountered a group of traders on the mountain trail, she automatically positioned herself to observe their approach routes and exit strategies, tactical awareness that suggested military or security training. When the traders mentioned recent political developments in the Valdorian Empire, her bioluminescent patterns shifted to colors that indicated intense interest despite her attempts to appear casually attentive. The Valdorian search efforts have expanded beyond the frontier systems, one of the traders mentioned during their brief interaction. Royal Guard ships have been conducting systematic sweeps throughout this entire sector. What are they searching for? Thomas asked, noting how Lyra's posture had become more rigid despite her efforts to maintain casual interest. Missing princess, the trader replied. Heir to the empire disappeared during a diplomatic mission. Word is that the Queen Mother has mobilized everything short of declaring martial law to find her daughter. Thomas observed Lyra's reaction through his peripheral vision, noting the way her bioluminescent patterns had shifted to the deep blues that indicated suppressed emotional responses. Her breathing had become more controlled, and her attention to the conversation had intensified despite her attempts to appear disinterested. Any indication of what happened to her? Thomas continued, recognizing that the information might be relevant to understanding the broader political situation that could affect their journey. Theories range from kidnapping to assassination attempt, the trader said grimly. The diplomatic mission was to neutral territory, but there are plenty of factions who would benefit from destabilizing Valdorian succession. After the traders continued on their way, Thomas and Lyra resumed their journey in silence that felt heavy with unspoken concerns. Thomas suspected that the news about the missing princess had triggered memories or fears related to Lyra's own circumstances, while Lyra struggled with the conflicting emotions of hearing about the massive search efforts her disappearance had prompted and the terror of being discovered before she was ready to face whatever she was running from. Thomas, Lyra said quietly as they made camp that evening, hypothetically, if someone needed to avoid official attention for reasons related to their own safety, what would be your assessment of their chances in a heavily searched area? Hypothetically, Thomas replied carefully, someone avoiding official attention would face increasing challenges as search efforts intensified, but the effectiveness of those efforts would depend on whether the searchers knew what they were actually looking for. Meaning that search operations designed to find someone who's been kidnapped would use different techniques than searches for someone who's chosen to disappear, Thomas explained, building their campfire while monitoring Lyra's reactions to his words. And searches based on incorrect assumptions about someone's condition or location would be less effective than searches based on accurate information. Lyra's bioluminescent patterns cycled through colors that suggested she was processing the implications of his assessment. And if someone needed to reach safety before revealing their location, then timing would be critical, Thomas said. The question would be whether they could reach their destination and establish security before search efforts located them. Thomas, may I ask whether you would continue to help someone if you discovered that their situation was more politically complicated than initially apparent? Thomas paused in his campfire maintenance to look directly at Lyra, recognizing that her question was testing his commitment to helping her regardless of what complications her true identity might involve. Lyra, I've been providing medical care on frontier worlds for several years, he said. I've treated refugees from political conflicts, deserters from various military organizations, people fleeing criminal organizations, and individuals whose backgrounds I've never fully understood. My policy is to provide medical care based on need rather than on the political implications of that care. Even if helping someone could put you in conflict with legitimate authorities. Even then, Thomas confirmed. Though I'd want to understand the nature of the conflict to make informed decisions about risk management. Lyra was quiet for a long time, her bioluminescent patterns shifting through what appeared to be complex internal debate about how much truth to share with someone whose help she needed but whose safety she didn't want to compromise. Thomas, she said finally, there are things about my situation that I can't explain without potentially putting both of us in greater danger. But I want you to know that my need for your help is genuine, and my gratitude for your assistance is sincere. I understand, Thomas said, recognizing that Lyra was asking him to continue helping her based on trust rather than complete information. Lyra, as long as you're not asking me to do anything that would harm innocent people, I'm willing to help you reach safety without requiring full disclosure about your circumstances. Thank you, she said, her bioluminescent patterns showing the warm golds that indicated relief and genuine appreciation. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of aircraft passing overhead, the distinctive engine signatures of Valdorian Royal Guard ships conducting search patterns over the mountain terrain. Lyra's reaction was immediate and telling. She moved quickly to extinguish their campfire and position herself under cover, her bioluminescent patterns dimming to almost nothing as she employed what appeared to be practiced concealment techniques. Those are search patterns, Thomas observed quietly, noting the systematic way the aircraft were covering the mountainous area. Yes, Lyra confirmed, her voice barely audible as she monitored the aircraft's movements with professional assessment of their search capabilities. Are they searching for you specifically? Lyra's bioluminescent patterns flickered with what might have been dark humor. Among others, possibly. Thomas studied her profile in the dim starlight, noting the combination of fear and sadness that characterized her expression as she watched the search aircraft continue their patterns. Lyra, are you the missing princess? The question hung in the air between them like a bridge that would change everything once crossed. Lyra turned to look at him directly, her amber eyes reflecting starlight in patterns that seemed to mirror the complexity of her emotional state. Would your answer change how you're willing to help me? She asked quietly. It would change my understanding of the risks involved, Thomas said honestly. But it wouldn't change my commitment to helping you reach safety. Thomas, what if I told you that returning to official custody might represent danger rather than safety for me? Then I would want to understand what kind of danger, so we could develop appropriate strategies for protection, Thomas replied. Lyra, if you are the missing princess, then people are searching for you because they want to help you. Some of them, yes, she agreed with bitter acknowledgement. But some of them are searching for me because my disappearance disrupted plans that didn't include my survival. Thomas felt the pieces of information clicking into place as he realized that Lyra's injuries and her need for anonymity might stem not from random violence but from assassination attempts that had failed to achieve their intended outcome. The attack you mentioned, it was targeted rather than random? Very targeted, Lyra confirmed. And Thomas, the people responsible for that attack have resources that include influence within official systems. Which means that revealing my location before I can establish security could expose me to additional attempts. And the capital city represents security? The capital city represents people I trust who can provide protection while I determine who is responsible for the attack and whether they remain a threat, Lyra explained. Thomas absorbed this information while recalculating their journey in terms of protecting someone whose life was actively threatened rather than simply providing medical care to an injured refugee. In that case, he said, we need to modify our approach to prioritize concealment and security rather than just medical recovery and travel efficiency. You're still willing to help me, knowing that doing so might put you in danger. Lyra, Princess Liara, I'm willing to help you because leaving you to face assassination attempts alone would be morally unacceptable, Thomas said, using her real name for the first time. Besides, protecting people from those who would harm them is something I have both training and experience in. Her bioluminescent patterns erupted in brilliant golds and blues that seemed to fill their concealed campsite with light as she processed his continued commitment to her safety despite the increased complexity and danger that her identity revealed. Thank you, she said simply, though her voice carried the weight of someone whose survival had just been given new hope through the kindness of a stranger who had chosen to protect her without expecting anything in return. Thank you for trusting me with the truth, Thomas replied, understanding that their relationship had evolved beyond healer and patient into something approaching partnership against common threats. As they settled in for the night with new awareness of the stakes involved in reaching the capital safely, both understood that their journey had become something more significant than medical care and travel assistance. It had become a mission to protect someone whose survival had implications that extended far beyond their personal safety into the realm of interstellar politics and galactic stability. The final day of their journey to the capital became a careful balance between Princess Liara's urgent need to reach safety and the increasing security presence that made concealment progressively more difficult. Thomas modified their route to avoid main roads where Valdorian patrol units were conducting systematic identification checks, while Liara used techniques she'd learned during diplomatic security training to minimize their visibility to aerial surveillance. The search intensity has increased significantly, Liara observed as they watched another squadron of Royal Guard aircraft pass overhead in coordinated search patterns. Thomas, I think my mother has escalated the search efforts beyond standard protocols. What would standard protocols involve? Systematic but discreet investigation, coordination with local authorities, diplomatic inquiries through official channels, Liara explained, her bioluminescent patterns showing the complex emotions of someone whose safety was being sought by people who loved her while simultaneously being threatened by those who wanted her dead. This level of mobilization suggests that she's treating my disappearance as a direct threat to imperial stability. Thomas studied the aircraft formations while calculating the implications of their increased surveillance capabilities. Which means that reaching the capital without being detected by search teams will be more challenging than we initially anticipated. But also means that once we do reach safety, the protection available will be more comprehensive than normal diplomatic security, Liara pointed out. Thomas, the increased search efforts suggest that my mother has reason to believe I'm in immediate danger. Do you think she knows about the assassination attempt? She might suspect it, Liara said grimly. Mother has always been more politically astute than I gave her credit for. If she's mobilized this level of search effort, it's because she's concluded that my disappearance wasn't accidental. As they approached the capital's outer districts, the evidence of massive search operations became impossible to ignore. Security checkpoints had been established at every major intersection, Valdorian military personnel were conducting door-to-door inquiries in residential areas, and the local communication networks were broadcasting continuous appeals for information about the missing princess. The coverage is remarkably thorough, Thomas observed, noting how the search teams were working with systematic precision that suggested professional military organization rather than improvised emergency response. And remarkably public, Liara added with concern. Thomas, this level of visibility for the search efforts means that anyone monitoring the situation will know exactly where official attention is focused. Including whoever was responsible for the assassination attempt. Exactly, Liara confirmed, her bioluminescent patterns showing the deep blues that indicated fear mixed with determination. Which means we need to reach safety quickly, before they can organize additional attempts while everyone's attention is focused on the search rather than on protection. Their entry into the capital required careful timing and route selection to avoid the most heavily monitored areas while still reaching the government district where Liara could make contact with trusted members of her mother's inner circle. Thomas guided them through residential neighborhoods and commercial areas where two travelers would attract less attention than in the political centers where security was most concentrated. The medical center, Liara said as they reached a position where they could observe the government district. If we approach the main medical facility, your credentials as a healer providing care to an injured Valdorian will give us legitimate reason to be there. And once we're inside, I can make contact with Dr. Kethril, the royal physician, who will be able to verify my identity and arrange immediate protection, Liara explained. Thomas, Dr. Kethril has been treating the royal family for decades. She'll recognize me regardless of my current condition. They made their way toward the medical center through streets that buzzed with search activity, Liara keeping her bioluminescent patterns deliberately dim while Thomas maintained the professional demeanor of someone conducting routine medical business. The approach worked until they reached the medical facility itself, where increased security protocols had been implemented specifically to screen for anyone matching the missing princess's description. Identification and purpose of visit, requested the security officer stationed at the medical center's main entrance, his attention focusing on Liara with the intensity that suggested he'd been specifically briefed about what to look for. Thomas Mercer, licensed field medic, Thomas said, presenting his credentials while positioning himself to partially obscure Liara from direct observation. I'm bringing in a patient who requires specialized care for plasma burn injuries. Patient identification. Lyra Thane, Liara said quietly, using a name that was technically accurate while avoiding the royal title that would immediately trigger security protocols. Frontier settler, injured during a bandit attack. The security officer's attention sharpened at the surname, though he didn't immediately react in ways that suggested recognition. Ms. Thane, I'll need to scan your bioluminescent patterns for medical record identification. Thomas felt tension spike as he realized that bioluminescent pattern recognition would immediately identify Liara regardless of what name she provided, but Liara stepped forward with the calm authority that royal training had ingrained despite her obvious anxiety. Officer, my patterns have been disrupted by trauma and medication, she said, allowing her bioluminescence to flicker weakly in ways that would make precise identification difficult. Dr. Kethrel in the Royal Medical Wing has specialized equipment for pattern analysis under compromised conditions. The Royal Medical Wing requires special authorization. Which I can provide, came a new voice from behind them. Thomas turned to see a Valdorian woman in medical robes approaching with the purposeful stride of someone who'd been alerted to their presence. Her bioluminescent patterns showed the deep purples and golds that indicated senior medical authority, and her amber eyes were focused on Liara with recognition that transcended current appearance. Dr. Kethrel, Liara said, her voice carrying relief mixed with residual caution. Your Highness, Dr. Kethrel replied formally, then immediately shifted to medical assessment mode as she observed Liara's condition. Security, please escort Princess Liara and her medical attendant to the secure medical wing immediately. And initiate royal protection protocols. Thomas watched the security officer's expression shift from routine screening to urgent response as he processed the confirmation that he was looking at the missing princess whose safe return had mobilized half the imperial military. Thomas, Liara said quietly as security personnel began implementing protection procedures around them, you've successfully delivered me to safety. Your obligation to help a wounded stranger has been fulfilled. Maybe, Thomas replied, noting how Liara's bioluminescent patterns showed anxiety about what would happen once she was back under official protection. But my commitment to ensuring your continued safety might be just beginning. What do you mean? I mean that if assassination attempts brought you to this situation, returning to normal royal security protocols might not provide adequate protection against threats that include people with insider access, Thomas said. Princess, you might need protection that comes from outside established systems rather than from within them. Dr. Kethrel, who had been listening to their conversation while guiding them toward the secure medical wing, spoke with the authority of someone whose medical opinions carried political weight. Dr. Mercer, your assessment of the security situation aligns with concerns that Queen Mother Seraphina has been expressing since Princess Liara's disappearance, she said. Perhaps you would be willing to discuss your observations with Her Majesty directly. Thomas realized that his journey from helping a wounded stranger to protecting royal heir was about to extend into territory he'd never anticipated, but Liara's safety remained his primary concern regardless of the political implications. I'll discuss anything that might help keep Princess Liara safe, he said, understanding that their adventure together was about to transform into something far more complex and significant than either of them had initially imagined. As they entered the secure medical wing and Thomas saw the elaborate protection protocols being activated around Princess Liara, he reflected that sometimes the most important commitments were the ones that began with simple human kindness and evolved into something that required everything you had to give in service of protecting people who deserved safety regardless of the personal cost to yourself. And ahead of them waited the moment when Queen Mother Seraphina would see her daughter alive and safe, creating the emotional reunion that would transform Thomas from anonymous helper into trusted guardian of royal security in ways that would reshape both their lives permanently. The reunion between Princess Liara and Queen Mother Seraphina occurred in the medical center's secure treatment room, where Thomas was completing his final assessment of Liara's injuries while Dr. Kethrel prepared more advanced treatment protocols. The sound of approaching footsteps accompanied by multiple security personnel indicated the arrival of someone whose presence required significant protection, but nothing had prepared Thomas for the emotional intensity of what he was about to witness. Queen Mother Seraphina entered the room with the controlled urgency of someone whose worst fears and greatest hopes were about to be simultaneously resolved. Her bioluminescent patterns showed the deep blues and purples that indicated suppressed anxiety mixed with desperate anticipation, and her amber eyes, so similar to her daughter's, immediately locked onto Princess Liara with the focused intensity of maternal love that had been strained to breaking point by 3 weeks of uncertainty. "Liara," the queen said, her voice carrying the weight of relief, joy, and pain in equal measure. "Mother," Princess Liara replied, her own bioluminescent patterns erupting in brilliant golds and blues that seemed to fill the medical room with light as she processed the safety that her mother's presence represented. What happened next would be etched in Thomas's memory for the rest of his life. Queen Mother Seraphina, ruler of one of the galaxy's most powerful empires, dropped to her knees beside her daughter's medical bed and began to weep with the raw emotion of a mother who had believed she might never see her child alive again. "My daughter," the queen whispered, her hands touching Liara's face with the gentle reverence of someone confirming that what they were seeing was real rather than desperate imagination. "I thought, when you disappeared, I feared I had lost you forever." Princess Liara reached for her mother's hands, her own tears creating bioluminescent patterns that seemed to dance across her cheeks as she responded to maternal love that had transcended political protocol to focus entirely on personal relief. "Mother, I'm alive. I'm safe. I'm home," Liara said, her voice carrying the comfort that children offered to parents whose protective instincts had been stretched beyond endurance. Thomas found himself witnessing the kind of reunion that put every political consideration into perspective as he watched two people whose relationship transcended royal titles and imperial responsibilities to focus entirely on the fundamental bond between parent and child that no amount of danger or separation could diminish. "Who?" Queen Seraphina asked, her voice still thick with emotion as she looked around the medical room for the person responsible for her daughter's safe return. "Who brought you home?" "Thomas," Princess Liara said, turning toward him with gratitude that made his chest tighten with emotion. "Dr. Thomas Mercer found me injured in the mountains and protected me during the journey to the capital. Mother, he saved my life." Queen Seraphina rose from her kneeling position and turned to face Thomas with the full attention of someone whose daughter's life had been preserved by a stranger's kindness. Her bioluminescent patterns shifted to the warm golds that indicated profound gratitude mixed with the respect that rulers reserved for those who had served their family beyond any expectation or obligation. "Dr. Mercer," the Queen said, her voice carrying the formal authority of someone making declarations that would have lasting political consequences, "you have returned to me the most precious thing in my universe. How can the Valdorian Empire repay such a debt?" Thomas felt the weight of royal attention settling around him as he realized that his simple decision to help an injured stranger had created obligations and opportunities that extended far beyond his original motivation to provide medical care. "Your Majesty, I require no repayment for providing medical assistance to someone who needed help," Thomas said, maintaining the respectful tone that diplomatic protocol required while recognizing that his response would affect not just his immediate situation but potentially his entire future. "Nevertheless, such service deserves recognition and reward," Queen Seraphina said, then paused as she noticed the way Princess Liara was watching the conversation with anxiety that suggested concern about losing the protection and companionship that had kept her safe during her journey home. "Mother," Princess Liara said quietly, "there's something else you should know about the circumstances that led to my disappearance." "What do you mean?" "The attack wasn't random," Princess Liara explained, her bioluminescent patterns showing the complex emotions of someone sharing information that would have significant political implications. "It was targeted, organized, and carried out by people with access to detailed information about my diplomatic mission." Queen Seraphina's patterns shifted to the deep reds that indicated anger mixed with the cold calculation that characterized her approach to political threats. "You're saying that the assassination attempt came from within our own systems?" "I'm saying that returning to normal security protocols might not provide adequate protection if the people responsible for the attack have insider access to those protocols," Princess Liara said, then looked toward Thomas with an expression that carried both gratitude and hope. "Mother, Thomas has proven that he can protect me from threats that conventional security didn't anticipate." Thomas felt the conversation shifting toward territory he hadn't expected as he realized that Princess Liara was advocating for his continued involvement in her protection rather than simply expressing gratitude for past assistance. Dr. Mercer, Queen Seraphina said, studying him with the analytical attention she applied to complex political problems, what is your assessment of the security challenges that my daughter faces? Your Majesty, Princess Liara survived the initial attack through resourcefulness and determination, but she remained vulnerable until she could reach trusted allies, Thomas said carefully. The threat level appears to be ongoing rather than resolved, and the people responsible have demonstrated both capability and access to information that suggests insider involvement. And your recommendation for addressing those threats? Thomas looked at Princess Liara, whose bioluminescent patterns showed hope mixed with anxiety as she waited for his response to a question that would determine whether their partnership would continue beyond the immediate crisis. Your Majesty, Princess Liara would benefit from protection that combines official security protocols with additional safeguards provided by people who aren't part of established systems, Thomas said. Someone with medical training, tactical experience, and no connections to existing political networks. Someone like yourself? If you believe that would serve Princess Liara's interests, Thomas confirmed, recognizing that he was accepting responsibility that would fundamentally change his life while simultaneously acknowledging that Princess Liara's safety had become more important to him than his own convenience or career plans. Queen Seraphina looked between Thomas and her daughter, noting the trust and mutual respect that had developed between them during their journey together, then made the kind of decision that rulers make when political calculation aligns with personal conviction. Dr. Mercer, I offer you a permanent position as Princess Liara's personal guardian and medical advisor, the Queen said formally. Your responsibilities would include ensuring her physical safety, providing ongoing medical care, and serving as her companion during diplomatic functions that require additional security considerations. And the terms of such a position? Full royal family protection, diplomatic immunity, access to resources necessary for Princess Liara's security, and compensation appropriate for someone whose service has proven invaluable to imperial interests, Queen Seraphina outlined. Dr. Mercer, you would essentially become a member of our family in all but legal adoption. Thomas looked at Princess Liara, whose bioluminescent patterns were showing the brilliant golds and blues that indicated joy and hope as she waited for his response to an offer that would make their partnership permanent rather than temporary. Your Majesty, I accept your offer, Thomas said, understanding that his decision represented not just career change but commitment to protecting someone whose safety had become personally important to him rather than simply professionally obligated. Excellent, Queen Seraphina said, her bioluminescent patterns showing satisfaction and relief as she realized that her daughter's security would be enhanced by someone whose loyalty had been proven through actions rather than simply promised through contracts. Princess Liara's response was immediate and heartfelt. Her bioluminescent patterns erupted in brilliant displays of happiness as she processed the confirmation that Thomas would remain in her life as protector, companion, and friend rather than departing once his medical obligations were fulfilled. Thank you, she said, her voice carrying gratitude that encompassed not just his acceptance of the guardian position but his original decision to help a wounded stranger without knowing that his kindness would transform both their lives. 1 year later, Thomas stood in the palace gardens where Princess Liara was conducting her first public diplomatic reception since her return, serving as both her personal guardian and her trusted advisor as she demonstrated the confidence and capability that had been enhanced rather than diminished by her experience of surviving assassination attempts and discovering the value of authentic relationships built on mutual respect rather than political calculation. Any regrets about accepting permanent assignment to protect royal heir? Princess Liara asked quietly during a brief pause in the diplomatic proceedings. Only the regret that I didn't find you sooner, Thomas replied, monitoring the security situation while noting how Princess Liara had grown into her role as future ruler with wisdom that had been deepened by her understanding of both vulnerability and strength. Thomas, you found me exactly when I needed to be found, Princess Liara said with the certainty of someone whose survival and growth had been enabled by a stranger's decision to provide help without expectation of reward. And you've stayed with me because protecting people who deserve safety is who you are, not because duty requires it. As they returned to the diplomatic reception where Princess Liara would continue demonstrating the leadership skills that would serve the Valdorian Empire well when she inherited the throne, Thomas reflected that the most important decisions were often the ones that began with simple moral choice, seeing someone who needed help and choosing to provide it regardless of personal convenience or potential complications. His discovery that he'd been protecting royalty without knowing it had led to opportunities and responsibilities he'd never anticipated, but more importantly, it had led to a relationship built on mutual trust, respect, and the recognition that the most meaningful protection came from people who chose to care about your welfare because of who you were as a person rather than because of what your safety might accomplish politically. And in the quiet moments between official functions and security briefings, both Thomas and Princess Liara understood that their bond had been forged through shared challenges that had revealed character rather than through formal obligations that merely required compliance, creating a partnership that would serve both personal loyalty and imperial security for as long as either of them drew breath.